Hi, I'm going to chat with you today about our last discussion topic, which is the focus of discussion forums 8, 9, and 10. Now, in each of the last 3 discussion forums, we will hone in on a specific set of informal fallacies to discuss, but the topic for all 3 discussion forums is the same, namely informal fallacies. So what is an informal fallacy? Well, an informal fallacy is defective reasoning. Now, it's informal as opposed to formal because the defect lies not in the structure of the reasoning, as is the case with an invalid argument, but instead lies in some other error. More specifically, we can say that there is some error of relevance between the premises and the conclusion. So the conclusion of an informal fallacy results because there is a lack of relevance between the premises and the conclusion. Now, the nature of that relevance might differ between one type of informal fallacy and another. But by and large, the big ticket problem, if you will, is a problem of relevance. So let's take a really, what I hope is a straightforward instance. Let's talk about the ad hominem or personal attack fallacy. The most common ad hominem attack involves the person who commits the fallacy dismissing another person's view or position based on some personal feature. So, for example, if someone argues that abortion is immoral, or someone argues that abortion is immoral, and instead of addressing the argument or the position itself, the reasoner says, well, we should just, ignore what so-and-so has to say about abortion because so-and-so is ugly, or so-and-so is a man, or so-and-so is a woman, right? When we do that, what we're doing by way of the personal attack is effectively ignoring the issue at hand, which should be addressed, and instead going for the person who has mounted the argument or who has asserted the position. And so the attack is entirely irrelevant to what we're supposed to be talking about, namely the position abortion is moral or abortion is immoral. So when we attack a person based on some feature of themselves rather than address the argument that they have presented, or let's say critique the position that they have advanced, we commit what's known as an ad hominem or personal attack fallacy. So the relevance issue is between the point at issue, the claim that they're making or the argument that they've mounted, and our attack, namely the fact that the critique of some personal feature is entirely irrelevant to whether or not their argument is any good, or is entirely irrelevant to whether or not the claim that they're making is true. Okay, so that's in broad strokes what's happening with defective reasoning of the informal type. Now, like I said a moment ago, each of our discussion forums, 8, 9, and 10, will focus on a set of fallacies. So be sure before you go in to do your investigating that you know which set of fallacies you're writing on for a given discussion forum. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at the prompts and the prompts, both the original discussion contribution that you make as well as your peer response. Okay, so the first of the last 3 discussion forum topics involves the fallacies from the list that we are studying this week. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that you all have consulted that fallacy list. And what you might consider doing is thinking about which fallacy resonates with you most. In other words, which fallacy do you get in terms of not only, if you will, the mechanics of the error that's committed, but why you see it as problematic. So you can take, any number of topics that are in our current climate, right? In other words, topics that are at the fore of social media interactions, news articles, and so forth. The idea is that you find an instance of one of the fallacies in the list. So I would focus on, if not the current contentious issues that are out in the news and on social media. If that doesn't appeal to you, then you can always focus on what you're thinking about, what's important to you, and then look for instances of poor reasoning within that domain of discourse. And by that domain of discourse, I mean that area that you want to focus on. So, maybe you're not interested in political issues, you're not interested in social issues, maybe you're interested in filmmaking or some other art form, and you are engaged with some community that has discussions about art. You're bound to find at some point some instance of someone who commits one of the types of fallacy that we're studying. Okay, so that's some idea of how you might proceed with finding what you are looking for. But the next part is just as important. You're going to want to copy and paste the example along with the link to the source. Then think about how you're going to use this template to help you with how you will reformulate the reasoning so as to highlight the error. So you're going to rewrite the argument. Then you're going to discuss the problem with the reasoning. So you can certainly say, the person commits thus and such fallacy name, but you want to explain how the instance is one instance of this fallacy being committed, of this error being committed. And then lastly, you want to say something about the why we shouldn't do this, why we should avoid this sort of error. And so the idea here is to have you engage with erroneous reasoning in a way that's a bit more robust than simply identifying a fallacy. Please note that you might find, because this is very common in our sort of common discourse or our ordinary discourse, that the passage that involves, or the quote that involves, or the advertisement, whatever it is, right, that you choose, that involves the error in reasoning that you've identified also involves other errors of reasoning. So it's oftentimes tough to sort of disentangle It's oftentimes difficult to disentangle multiple errors within one instance of a reasoning, a piece of reasoning. So don't worry if you think there's more going on than you're addressing. Just try to identify and articulate the error that you want to deal with, and then analyze that error. Now, a couple things. One is the list of fallacies organized by category is found on the last page of Chapter 5 of our text. And you can, as you know, find the chapter embedded within the relevant week or weeks that we're studying fallacies. But you can also find the chapter within under the textbook link, under the textbook and workbook and exercise key module on our homepage. The other point that I wanted to make is this. When I first discussed or mentioned to you how it is that informal fallacies in general function, I said that there is a relevance issue, namely the premises and conclusion aren't relevant to each other. Now you might say, well, Mia, there's one category of fallacy called fallacies of relevance. Does that mean that fallacies of linguistic ambiguity, weak induction, and presumption are not fallacies of relevance? And my answer to that is no, that doesn't mean that those aren't also fallacies of relevance. But think about my overarching category this way. A fallacy as such involves a fundamental disconnection between the premises and the conclusion, which strikes me as a relevance issue. Now, depending on what textbook you open up, you're going to get fallacies categorized differently. There's some overlap, of course, right? But not every single critical thinking textbook has the same taxonomy of fallacies. But the whole point of organizing fallacies, sorry, let me rephrase that. The whole point of categorically organizing fallacies is to try to, help us simplify our thinking a bit. Why? Well, there are loads and loads and loads of fallacies. Just go ahead and do an internet search for informal fallacies, and some of the major hits that come up are links to sites that have hundreds of fallacies. So how are you supposed to sort of wrap your head around so many fallacies? Well, one way is to start categorizing them according to certain important features. So that's why I follow what happens in other textbooks. Namely, I organize fallacies according to some major categories. That said, I'm still committed to the view that the fundamental defect that typifies an informal fallacy is a defect of relevance. Okay, so I hope that this gets you started on the process of writing your last 3 discussion forum original contributions. Now, a word about the peer response. It's really important that you engage with your your peer's original contribution in a way that shows that you grasp what it is that they're saying about the error in reasoning that they've found. You may offer some ways to improve their analysis or their reformulation of the original reasoning error. You may decide that you really appreciated what they have chosen and how they've analyzed what they've chosen, but you need to talk about why you appreciate it, right? What is it that they've done that's helpful, right? So your peer engagement is something that should involve a robust interaction with what they've written, the substance of what they've written.